Charles Tannock, the air around the summit, upcoming Vilnius summit, is very pessimistic. That's what we hear from the diplomats, that's what we hear from a lot of your colleagues. They say that nobody is expecting any great or glorious outcome of the upcoming Vilnius summit.
I think sadly you're right. As we know, Armenia has made a choice now to join the Russian-led customs union. It looks like Moldova and probably Georgia will initial, which is just basically the very beginning of the process. But of course the big fish, the big hope was Ukraine, which would be signing to join, i.e. the first stage of the ratification, then it has to come to the national parliaments and the European Parliament. But I was in Kiev 2 weeks ago, and I met with my delegation, everybody who was anybody in the government. We met the Prime Minister, the President, the Foreign Minister, leaders of the opposition, both Klitschko and Yatsenyuk. And I certainly came away with the opinion, and we also spoke on the phone to Pat Cox from the Cox-Kwasniewski European Parliament mission mandated by the EU, that really
what's wrong?
Hopes are fading, because I think that there's two things. First of all, I think we overestimated the personal political capital which President Yanukovych has invested in the continued imprisonment of former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko. We thought there might be some kind of a deal, but there's been no deal. Hopes have been raised a couple of times. I even went as far as making a statement to Euronews about more than a month, 6 weeks ago, thinking the whole thing was now on the path towards her release and sending her to Germany, either with the partial pardon, which would have been the best, or possibly with the new bill made law in the Rada to allow her to go abroad for medical treatment.
Sorry, but is that the only reason or the major reason?
No,
what do you think the major reason?
I think that Yulia Tymoshenko became an iconic kind of red line which he would not step over, and the European Union member states, particularly led by Germany, have used this as a kind of a litmus test to measure the reforms within Ukraine. There are others, of course, the independence of the judiciary, reforms of parliament and so on, but her release became the kind of acid test, and that clearly he's not willing to deliver on. He has the absolute power to release her tomorrow, just with one signature on a pardon. He won't do it. But, understood.
Besides of that,
but also there are other things. There are other things. I think the fact of the matter that President Yanukovych has been to Moscow and met President Putin, I think it's the third occasion in the last 3 months, and we don't know what was discussed, but I am pretty suspicious that he has cut a deal with Putin, who has put enormous pressure on him, both economic, in terms of, fake or spurious new regulations against Ukrainian exports, like the chocolate manufacturer.
Do you think it's economic pressure, or there are some more reasons? So we have Tymoshenko, we have Russian pressure.
Yeah, well, there may be more to it. I mean, President Putin is a former KGB colonel. They will resort to any kind of tactics to achieve their goals.
I think about the other thing. Did European Union offer sufficient interest, sufficient involvement? Were their proposals enough?
Well, I suspect not. I suspect the carrot wasn't strong enough the other way. Yes, we would have opened immediately by implementing the trade aspects immediately, with immediate effect, access of Ukrainian exports to our markets. That was given. But there was the serious problem that the Ukrainians would have had to pay more for their gas imports, and we would have had to match that with considerable generosity on our side, like a reverse flow of the pipelines, the Friendship pipeline with gas, perhaps an increased direct budgetary aid, because their budget's under enormous pressure. The economy is very weak in Ukraine, and I don't think there was any political will in the EU to reach deep into our pockets to match the damage which Russia can inflict on Ukraine now if Ukraine doesn't do what it wants. That's the problem.
But are we back in the USSR? Because
well, I think that President Putin himself once said the greatest disaster which ever befell Russia was the collapse of the USSR. I think it was Densky who once said, Russia alone is a power, a world power. Russia with Ukraine is a superpower. To the Russian psyche, particularly the Siloviki of the Kremlin, having Ukraine back in their sphere of influence, militarily, economically, politically, etc., is historically very, very important, both from the point of the Russian Orthodox Church, the home of Christianity and Orthodoxy in Russia, to the fact they have a very major military industrial complex, heavy lift Antonov. They are a fantastic granary producing lots of wheat for the former Soviet Union, and they would do for Russia again. They have the Black Sea Fleet in Sebastopol, etc., etc. So getting Kiev back under the control of the Kremlin is a major strategic goal of Putin.
So what does it mean for the European Union? Is it a big crash of the Eastern Partnership politics?
Well, I think it is in a way, but I have to say I partly blame the European Union member states. I go right back to the Orange Revolution. Many of the member states, particularly Germany, France, in that order, to a lesser extent, Rome, Madrid. My country was the exception. These countries did not want Ukraine heading in a Euro-Atlantic direction. As far as they
Why?
Because as far as they were concerned, Ukraine belonged to the near abroad, the Russian sphere of influence. It was part of the former Soviet Union, and except for the 3 Baltic states, all the other countries of the Soviet Union belonged to Russia's sphere of influence, and none of them wished to touch that sort of post-Second World War architecture in terms of sphere of influence. They were also concerned about the competition that Ukrainian industry and agriculture would pose to French agriculture, German industry, and so they were happy to keep it moving in that direction towards Moscow. I think there's been a change of heart in the last 2 or 3 years. Increasingly, people have got fed up with Russian bullying, the way they bullied member states from Estonia, the way they treated the Georgians and they invaded Georgia, the way they bullied the Moldovans recently over their wine exports, etc. So clearly, you know, Moscow is not as popular. In my country, very unpopular because of the murder of Litvinenko, the Lugovoy scandal, and so on.
That's the other point, but I'm interested from the point of view of strategy. So
it's a terrible mistake. We should have offered Ukraine, well, I say we, the European Union, potential membership of the European Union during the Orange Revolution. There was a complete refusal to do that. It was offered to Albania, and yet not, and to Turkey, but not to Ukraine. So Ukraine is less European than Albania or Turkey. And so then we made these mistakes. There was some hope that we were now reversing them by offering the DCFTA and offering the association agreement. It was all done in very good faith. The big businessmen, the oligarchs, the Akhmetovs and the Firtashes and people in Ukraine, they wanted Ukraine to have the access to the European markets. They are afraid of being taken over by Russian oligarchs who are doing the bidding of the Kremlin and being forced to sell their assets cheaply to Russian interests, particularly the banks, the steel industry and so on. So they wanted to open up to the West. So Yanukovych was under pressure from his own supporters, particularly people like Akhmetov who fund the Regionov party, to go down the European and Atlantic towards NATO and European Union, getting closer, a political agenda. And I think for a long time he was accepting that until the Russians suddenly woke up under Lavrov 2 years ago and decided that any enlargement of the sphere of influence of the European Union in trade or political terms was against Russian national interests. And after that, the Russians completely focused their foreign policy in stopping any of these agreements with their former Soviet neighbors, such as Armenia, where they were successful, and they're probably going to be successful with Ukraine as well now.
Thank you very much, Charles Tannock.
My pleasure.